I was 2 weeks overdue for a shower and a decent meal, but the sight of my own front porch made the 18-wheel vibration in my bones finally stop. I just wanted my bed. Then I heard the laughter. I reached for the doorknob, but the sound of laughter stopped me. It wasn't the warm, welcoming sound of a homecoming. It was sharp, brittle. I didn't open the door. I stood there in the shadows of the foyer, the weight of my kit bag pulling at my shoulder, and listened. The dining room was glowing with the soft light of the chandelier I'd spent 3 weekends installing. I could hear the rhythmic clinking of silverware against fine china, the good plates, the ones Emily said were only for special occasions. "He's late again, of course." My mother-in-law Gloria's voice drifted through the hallway, thick with a condescension she never bothered to hide. "Does he even have a watch, Emily? Or do they not teach them how to tell time in those driving schools?" "Oh, Mom, let him be," Emily replied. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was airy, dismissive, the way one talks about a stubborn stain on the rug. "The longer he's on the I-70, the more overtime he clears. We need that new deck finished by summer. And Christian says the cedar prices are through the roof." My grip tightened on the strap of my bag. Christian. The name tasted like copper in my mouth. He was the __quote_1__ Emily had hired for the renovations. A man with soft hands and expensive shoes. "It's just so exhausting, isn't it?" Emily continued, and I heard the pour of wine into a glass. "Having to explain what he does for a living when we're with your friends. I can't exactly say my husband is an intellectual." "He's not a husband, Mom. He's a credit card that smells like exhaust. I just need him to keep driving so I don't have to look at his grease-stained face while I'm picking out marble for the kitchen." Gloria chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "At least machines don't try to make conversation at dinner parties." "Exactly." Emily's voice dropped, laced with a cruel sort of amusement. "Sometimes I look at him across the table, and I see nothing but the miles. He's got no ambition, no vision, just the road and the next paycheck. He's a ghost in a flannel shirt." I felt a coldness spread from my chest to my fingertips. It wasn't a sudden explosion of rage. It was worse. It was the sound of a foundation cracking. I had pushed through blizzards in the Rockies and sleepless nights in Nebraska for this. I had traded my youth and my health for this house, for those plates, for the woman laughing at my expense. I kicked the door open. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. The laughter died instantly. Emily sat at the head of the table, a glass of Chardonnay halfway to her lips. She didn't gasp. She didn't look guilty. She just narrowed her eyes, watching me as I dropped my greasy bag onto the polished hardwood floor. "You're home early," she said, her voice flat. Apparently. I walked into the dining room. The air smelled of roasted rosemary and expensive wine. It smelled like a life I didn't recognize. "I didn't realize my primary function was being an ATM, Emily. I thought I was your husband." Gloria cleared her throat and looked at her nails. Emily didn't even flinch. She set her glass down with a deliberate click and leaned back, surveying me with a look of pure, unadulterated boredom. "Don't be dramatic, Mike. It's exhausting. You weren't supposed to hear that. But now that you have, what are you going to do? Yell? Smash something?" She sighed, shaking her head. "That's the problem. You're so predictable. Christian is different. He's an architect of ideas, of spaces. He's on a different level entirely. He understands the nuance of things." "He understands how to spend another man's money, you mean?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "It's not just the money," she snapped. her mask of civility finally slipping to reveal the venom beneath. It's the class, the prestige. When I'm with him, I don't feel like I'm waiting for a delivery. Your place is on the shoulder of the highway, Mike. That's where you belong. Not here. Not with me in decent society. You're a relic. She looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I saw the truth. There was no love left, not even a shred of pity. I was just a tool that had outlived its usefulness. The mortgage is in my name, Emily, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Then call your lawyer in the morning, she shrugged, turning back to her plate. But tonight, you're covered in road grit and I'm having dinner. Go wash up in the garage, or better yet, just leave. I looked at Gloria, who wouldn't meet my eye, and then at my wife. The woman I'd worked 18-hour shifts for. The woman I'd traded my dreams for. I didn't say another word. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a fight. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I didn't go upstairs to pack. I went to the mudroom and grabbed my old, oil-stained canvas work jacket, the one she always hated. My fingers found the heavy brass key to my '94 Silverado, the only thing in this life that was truly mine. I stepped out onto the porch. The Ohio air was damp and smelled of coming rain. Behind me, I heard the muffled sound of their voices resuming, the clink of silver returning to the plates. The ATM was leaving, and they didn't even pause their meal. I climbed into the cab of the truck. The engine turned over with a guttural, honest roar that drowned out the silence of the house. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror at the glowing windows of the home I'd built. The dinner tasted like ash, but the road ahead smelled like iron and freedom. I shifted into gear and let the darkness of the highway swallow me whole. I was 2 weeks overdue for a shower and a decent meal, but the sight of my own front porch made the 18-wheel vibration in my bones finally stop. I just wanted my bed. Then I heard the laughter. I remembered the weight of the cash after I sold my truck to a wholesaler in Chicago. I didn't haggle. I didn't need the quote 3 my father had left me. I needed the seed money for a smoker and a roadside permit. I just took the check, the capital for my first stand, and walked out into the cold wind with a plan and a burning in my chest. That was the beginning of the quote 4 __. I leaned my head back against the worn vinyl seat, the memory shifting into the suffocating heat of the salt mines before I'd moved to the long-haul routes. I could almost feel the grit in my lungs again, the way the damp heat 1,500 feet below the surface turned my work shirt into a second suffocating skin. 12-hour shifts of back-breaking labor, followed by the walk to the company parking lot where my bones felt like they were made of cooling lead. I'd lived on lukewarm tap water and those 10-cent packets of ramen noodles, the kind that leave a chemical burn on your tongue. I'd told her I was eating well at the site cafeteria. I lied so she could have the MacBook Pro with the Retina display and the $3,000 rendering software that she said quote 5 used. I remember the night I brought that laptop home. I'd worked 18 days straight, a double shift on the final Sunday. My hands were so cramped, so swollen from the vibration of the drills, that I couldn't even unzip my own jacket. Emily had unzipped it for me. She'd kissed my bruised knuckles, her eyes shimmering with what I thought was devotion. "We're a team, Mike," she had breathed against my neck. "You're the engine, and I'm the vision. Once I graduate, once I'm an architect, you'll never have to go down into that hole again. I promise. We're building this together." "He's not a husband, Mom.
He's a credit card that smells like exhaust. I just need him to keep driving so I don't have to look at his grease-stained face while I'm picking out marble for the kitchen. I looked down at my palms in the flickering purple light. They were a map of every mile I'd traded for her prestige. The scars from a burst radiator hose in Nebraska. The deep, permanent calluses from 5 years of shifting gears and hauling freight. My body was a ledger of her debts, written in aches and tremors. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a crumpled photo. It was from her graduation day. She looked radiant in her black gown, holding her diploma like a trophy. I was standing beside her, looking gray and diminished, my suit jacket pulling tight across shoulders that had grown too broad from manual labor. I looked like a bodyguard or a servant standing next to a queen. Even then, the distance had begun to grow. I just hadn't been smart enough to see the ___, quote, _9, _ of it. I realized then that she hadn't been building a life with me. She'd been using me as the scaffolding to build a life that didn't include me. I was the rough-hewn timber, meant to be torn down and hauled away once the polished marble was in place. The silence of the truck cab grew heavy, pressing against my ribs. I reached for the ignition. The engine groaned, a massive iron beast waking up in the gut of the machine. The vibration traveled up through the soles of my boots into my spine, shaking the ghosts of the last 5 years loose. She wanted a ghost in a flannel shirt? She wanted a machine? Fine. But machines don't just provide. They also crush whatever gets caught in the gears. I shifted into first, the heavy metal linkage clunking with a sound of finality. I wasn't the engine anymore. I was the storm. And as I pulled out of the lot, leaving the purple neon behind, I knew the price of her dream hadn't been fully paid yet. Not by a long shot. The air in East Palestine, Ohio, tasted of wet slate and rusted iron. I pulled the Silverado onto a patch of gravel that the weeds had been trying to reclaim for a decade. It was an old filling station, the kind that died when the interstate bypassed the local routes, leaving nothing but a skeleton of a corrugated shed and a cracked concrete pad. I didn't need a house. I didn't need a mahogany table. I needed a place where the world couldn't find me until I was ready to be seen. I spent the first week in a silence so thick it felt like a physical weight. My joints still hummed with the ghost vibration of the Peterbilt, and my lower back was a map of knots that refused to untie. I'd look at my hands in the dim light of a battery-powered lantern, the grease, the calluses, the scars from Emily's ___, quote, _10 ___, and I felt a slow, cold heat beginning to stir in my gut. It wasn't the frantic heat of a fire. It was the steady, terrifying glow of a blast furnace. I found a boxing gym in the basement of an old textile mill 3 towns over. It smelled of wintergreen liniment, ancient leather, and the sour, honest sweat of men who had nothing left to lose. The first time I hit the heavy bag, my knuckles split. The second time, my shoulder screamed. By the third week, the bag didn't just swing, it shuddered. I wasn't just punching leather. I was swinging at the memory of that Chardonnay glass clicking against the table, at the sound of Christian's name, at the way my own wife had called me a relic. Every drop of sweat that hit the floor felt like a payment on a debt I owed to myself. 20 pounds of trucker's spread fell off me in 2 months, replaced by a lean, corded hardness that made my old flannel shirts hang loose off my frame. My jawline, buried for years under the soft padding of road food and stress, began to cut through like a blade.
but the nights were for the steel. I hauled 3 massive industrial propane tanks and a set of reclaimed offset fireboxes onto my gravel lot. I spent hours under the spray of sparks from an angle grinder, the orange glow illuminating the grit on my face. I was building something. Not a house for a woman who hated the smell of my skin, but a machine of my own. I remembered my grandfather back in Galveston, the way his eyes would squint through the blue oak smoke, the way he'd say that a man who can master fire and meat never has to beg for a seat at any table. I welded the seams shut, the smell of burning ozone mixing with the damp Ohio night. I wasn't an architect of, quote, 13, like Christian. I was a man of heat and iron. The first time I fired up the smoker, the scent of post oak and black pepper drifted across the highway like a siren song. I'd rubbed a prime brisket with nothing but salt, heavy, coarse pepper, and a secret my grandfather had whispered to me when I was 10. I let it ride for 16 hours, watching the temperature gauge like a hawk, feeding the firebox one split log at a time. A lone, long-haul driver pulled his rig onto my gravel shoulder at 3 a.m., drawn by the smoke. I sliced a piece of the point for him. The bark was black and crusty, the meat beneath it a deep, trembling pink that fell apart at the touch of a plastic fork. The driver didn't say a word for a full minute. He just chewed, his eyes closing, a long, shaky breath escaping his lungs. "My God," he whispered, wiping grease from his chin with the back of a scarred hand. "I've been from San Diego to Maine, and I ain't never tasted nothing like this. What do you call this place?" I looked at my hands. They were still stained, but they were steady. The tremors were gone. "Big Mike's," I said, the words sounding heavy and certain in the cool night air. Word didn't just spread, it caught fire. Within 6 months, the gravel lot was packed before noon. I traded the Silverado for a fleet of custom-built smoker trailers. I didn't just sell food. I sold a reminder of what honest work tasted like. 2 years bled into 3, and the quote 14 started to vanish, replaced by a man the local papers called the quote 15. I stopped wearing the oversized flannels. I wore dark, fitted denim and boots that didn't have holes in the soles. I grew a beard that I kept trimmed sharp, the gray at my temples no longer looking like a sign of age, but like a mark of authority. By the time I opened the 5th, Big Mike's Smokehouse in Columbus, I wasn't just a man with a grill. I was a brand. I sat in my office above the flagship restaurant, looking at a spread in a national lifestyle magazine. The photo showed me standing in front of my custom black steel smokers, my arms crossed, my eyes hard and clear. The headline read, "The Raw Grit of Success: How Mike Evans Turned Smoke into an Empire." I looked at my reflection in the window. I still have the burn scar from that first smoker on my forearm. My joints still ache when it rains. But now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a machine. I see the man who owns the road you're begging to walk on. My chest didn't ache anymore. My back was straight. I picked up a pen and signed the final papers for the acquisition of a downtown development plot, a space Emily had been trying to bid on for her firm for 3 years. I knew she was struggling. I knew the quote 17 was failing without the quote 18 to fund it. I leaned back, feeling the expensive leather of my chair creak under my weight. The road had been long, and the ash had been bitter. But as I watched the smoke rise from the pits below, I knew the reckoning was only just beginning. And this time, I wasn't the one being delivered. I was the one delivering the bill. The rain in Columbus didn't fall. It hammered against the panoramic windows of my flagship restaurant, a relentless, rhythmic drumming that sounded like gravel hitting a coffin lid. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of charred white oak, and the rich, heavy perfume of rendered fat and molasses. It was the smell of my kingdom. I stood at the pass, adjusting the leather straps of my custom-made apron. The material was thick, stained with the honest work of a 12-hour shift, but beneath it, my black shirt was crisp, tailored to fit shoulders that no longer slumped under the weight of someone else's expectations. I looked at the ticking clock on the wall. 9:42 p.m. We were winding down. Then the heavy oak door groaned open. A gust of wet, freezing air sliced through the warmth of the dining room. I didn't look up immediately. I was busy slicing a brisket, the blade of my knife gliding through the meat like it was soft butter. But the silence that followed the door's closing was different. It wasn't the respectful quiet of a hungry customer. It was a jagged, suffocating pause. I wiped the steel and looked toward the entrance. She stood there, drenched. The expensive, airy glow I remembered had been extinguished, replaced by a gray, frantic paleness. Emily. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed for gallery openings, hung in limp, wet strands against a coat that was 2 seasons old and pilling at the cuffs. She looked smaller, not lean like I had become, but diminished, as if the world had been taking bites out of her while I wasn't looking. Her eyes tracked me as I walked from behind the counter. She didn't see the ATM on wheels. She saw a man whose name was etched in gold on the building across the street. She saw the Barbecue King, and for the first time in our lives, she looked afraid to speak. "Mike," she whispered. Her voice broke, a dry rattle that reminded me of her mother's laugh. I didn't answer. I stopped 6 feet away, my arms loose at my sides. I didn't feel the surge of rage I'd expected. I didn't feel the heat of old wounds. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical curiosity, the way one might look at a stalled engine on the side of the road. "They told me you were here," she said, her hands trembling as she tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "I didn't believe it. The magazines, the news. You look so different." "The road changes a man, Emily," I said. My voice was a low rumble, steady and stripped of the hesitation she used to prey on. "What do you want?" She took a step forward, her boots squeaking on the polished concrete. A sob escaped her, raw and ugly. "Christian is gone, Mike. He's just gone. He took the lines of credit I opened for the firm. He took the down payments from the new clients. He left me with the lawsuits and the debt. The house. The bank served the papers yesterday." I watched a drop of rainwater travel down her nose and fall onto the floor. I remembered the cedar deck. I remembered the architect of ideas. "He was an artist, wasn't he?" I said, the irony as sharp as my carving knife. "He drew a map to your bank account and followed it to the exit." "Please," she gasped, reaching out a hand, then pulling it back when she saw the lack of movement in my face. "I have nothing. I'm staying in a motel that smells like bleach and cigarettes. I've called everyone, Mike. No one will take my bridge loans. No one will hire me. They say I'm, quote, 22 because of the fraud." She sank onto the edge of a bench, her shoulders shaking. "I just need a chance, just a job, anything. I can run the front of the house. I know design. I know how to talk to the high-end clients. I'll work for minimum wage, Mike. Just don't leave me out there." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the woman who told me to wash up in the garage. I saw the woman who called me a relic while she drank wine paid for by my sweat. I thought about the thousands of miles of black asphalt, the salt mines, the lonely birthdays and truck stops, and the way she had discarded me like a blown tire. I stepped closer, leaning down so she could see the clarity in my eyes. The scent of the smoker, the scent of my success, filled the space between us. "You called me a machine once," I said softly. "You said I was predictable, a ghost in a flannel shirt."
"I was wrong,"
she choked out, fresh tears carving tracks through her ruined makeup.
"I was so wrong. We were a team, Mike, remember? You were the engine."
"No," I corrected her, my voice as hard as the steel pits in the back. "I was the fuel, and you burned me until there was nothing left but ash. You told me to wash up in the garage, Emily. Well, I'm clean now. And you? You smell like a bad investment. Marcus, show her where the highway is. She says she knows it well." I straightened up, the movement fluid and effortless. "I don't have a place for you here. Not in the front, and certainly not in the back. My staff is built on trust and grit. You don't possess either."
"Mike, please. It's pouring outside. I have nowhere to go."
Her voice rose to a thin, desperate wail.
"You told me once that my place was on the shoulder of the highway," I said, turning my back on her.
"That I belonged in the grit. Well, I've learned to love the grit. It's honest. It's real. You spent your whole life trying to build a world of nuance and class on a foundation of my broken bones. Now the foundation is gone." I caught the eye of Marcus, my head server, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I don't hand out scraps to people who spit in the well they drink from," I said over my shoulder. "You chose your side of the road, Emily. Now you get to find out how long the walk is." I walked back toward the kitchen, the swinging doors heavy and solid. I didn't look back when I heard the scuffle of her being led toward the exit. I didn't look back when the heavy oak door thudded shut, cutting off the sound of her pleading. I picked up my knife and went back to work. Outside, the rain continued to wash the world clean, but inside, the fire was just getting started. I had a dinner to finish, and for the first time in my life, nothing tasted like ash.